Some stories, they just explode into existence. They announce themselves. But others start with a whisper. They begin with something so normal, so everyday that you'd completely miss the exact moment your world tilts on its axis and points towards something inexplicable. This is one of those stories. It doesn't start with a crime or some big disaster. Nope, it starts with a simple purchase. A purchase that unraveled into a modern legend of pure, unimaginable terror. $50. That's it. That's all it cost. Picture this. It's a blistering hot Phoenix afternoon, June 2018. A man named Dan Morrison hands over two 20s and a 10. And for what? For a forgotten little room, a metal box filled with the stuff someone else left behind. I mean, $50 seems like nothing, right? It's dinner for two, maybe a couple of movie tickets. But for Dan, it turned out to be the most expensive purchase he'd ever make. A price he wouldn't pay with money, but with his own sanity. Now, Dan was no rookie. For 3 years, this was his life, flipping abandoned storage units. He was like a modern-day treasure hunter, sifting through the leftovers of people's lives. He knew the drill: buy low, sell high, and always hope for that one incredible find. And believe me, he'd seen it all. Boxes of priceless comics, forgotten antiques. He even found a classic car under a tarp once. He figured he was ready for anything. But Unit 217? Unit 217 was different. It was holding a secret that was way, way darker than anything he could have possibly dreamed up. So he snaps the cheap lock, wrestles with that groaning metal door, and boom, that familiar smell of dust and old memories hits him. The unit itself, it was nothing special. A stained mattress, a wobbly bookshelf, boxes of old paperbacks. He starts his usual routine, sorting the junk from the gems. And that's when he saw it. Tucked away, taped to the back of a filing cabinet, deliberately hidden. It was just a plain cardboard box, no labels, no writing. But when he picked it up, it was heavy, unusually heavy, like it was dense with a secret it had been keeping for a very long time. He opens the box and it's just full of Polaroid photos, hundreds of them stacked in these neat little chronological bundles. And each one shows a person in a completely normal, everyday moment. Laughing in a park, waiting for a bus, buying groceries. But these weren't memories. They were predictions of death. Every single photo documented a person's final moments on Earth. And as he dug deeper and deeper into the box, his breath catching in his chest, he got to the very last one. It was a photo of him, with his own death date written right underneath it. Okay, so let's rewind to that moment. Sunbelt Storage. It's late, the auction's pretty much over, all the serious buyers have already grabbed the good units and gone home. Unit 217 was just an afterthought, really. But Dan Morrison, he saw something. And with one $50 bed, no competition, it was his. He had absolutely no idea he was betting on the last things a missing man owned. He didn't know he was about to uncover a 15-year history of impossibly perfect predictions, one photo at a time. This is the first one that really got his attention. A woman, maybe in her 30s, big smile, holding grocery bags. Just a normal snapshot, right? The kind of thing you'd stick on your fridge. But underneath, in this stark black marker, was a name and a date. Rebecca Walsh, March 8, 2009. It was so specific, so clinical. His first thought, maybe it's some kind of weird art project, a creepy collection of old photos. He was about to find out just how wrong he was. So just out of curiosity, Dan pulls out his phone and types her name into Google. The result pops up instantly, a local news article from 9 years before. And the headline, it just sent this bolt of ice right through him. Rebecca Walsh, age 34, killed in a tragic hit and run. The date, March 8, 2009. The location, the parking lot of the exact same grocery store you can see in the background of that photo. A cold sweat starts to form on his neck. This couldn't be a coincidence. It was literally impossible. He starts scrambling, frantically grabbing another photo from the box, his hands suddenly feeling clumsy and numb. This one showed an older guy, gray beard, sitting on a park bench, just peacefully feeding pigeons. And below the picture, same exact handwriting. Thomas Chen, July 15th, 2011. A wave of denial just washed over him. He was hoping, praying that he'd find a mistake, a different name, a wrong date, anything at all to prove this was just some sick, twisted joke. But there was no mistake. He searched for Thomas Chen, and it was the same impossible story, an obituary. He died of a massive heart attack on that exact date while sitting on a park bench in San Francisco. Dan's heart was just hammering in his chest. He started pulling photos out at random, getting more and more frantic. A young man on a ladder, a woman reading in a coffee shop, a kid on a skateboard. One by one, he checked their names. their dates, and one by one, he found their obituaries. Every single photo was a perfect match. The person, the date, the death. Every single time. I mean, what do you even do with that? The evidence pointed to one of two just terrifying ideas. Was he holding the trophy box of a ghost-like serial killer? Someone who'd staged hundreds of accidents over 15 years without ever leaving a trace? Or, and this is maybe even crazier, did the photographer somehow have the ability to see the future, to know exactly when and how someone was going to die? Both options were just horrifying. Both of them just shattered everything Dan thought was real. With his hands shaking so bad he could barely hold it, Dan reached for the very last photograph in the box. It felt different, colder. He turned it over and his world just stopped. He was staring at his own face, at his own confused expression. It was him, in the same sweat-stained t-shirt he was wearing at that exact moment, standing in that same storage unit, lit by that one bare bulb, holding that exact same box. The picture was taken from just outside the door, and underneath, in that same terrifyingly neat handwriting, his name and a date just a few weeks away. The 911 call Dan made was, as you can imagine, almost incoherent, but it brought the police. The storage unit was immediately declared a crime scene, and the investigation quickly showed that the unit was rented to a guy named Malcolm Pierce. But here's the kicker. Pierce was a total recluse, basically a ghost. His neighbors hadn't seen him in months, and he'd been reported missing back in April, the same month as the last dated photo of a victim. Besides Dan's, of course. He had just vanished, leaving nothing behind but this grim collection. 347. That's the number that just staggered the investigators. That's how many photos of other people were in that box. 347 lives, each one documented in their final, unsuspecting moments. Just think about that. Over 15 years, that's an average of one death documented every 2 weeks. A silent, hidden tragedy unfolding for more than a decade with only one person who knew. The scale of it was just, it's beyond comprehension. So, Detective Sarah Rodriguez, a 23-year veteran of the Phoenix PD, she takes the case. This is a woman who has seen the absolute worst of humanity. But this was something else. This defied all logic. She didn't believe in prophecies, but she couldn't just ignore the evidence staring her in the face. So as a precaution, she put Stan Morrison under 24/7 police protection. Killer or curse, it didn't matter. July 4th was coming. And Dan was now a man living on borrowed time, haunted by the 347 faces that came before his. Detective Rodriguez's team just ran circles around the theories, but nothing fit. A serial killer who stages that many perfect accidents across multiple states without a single shred of forensic evidence ever being found, it just seemed impossible. The psychic ability thing, that's for the movies, not a police report. And as for a hoax, well, they brought in experts from Polaroid who confirmed the chemical batches in the film perfectly matched the manufacturing dates for the years on the photos. The evidence was undeniable, yet completely and utterly illogical. As June turned into July, that clock was just ticking louder and louder. Dan was living in this state of constant gnawing fear. Every car that drove by, every stranger who looked at him too long, it could be it. He was a prisoner of a date on a calendar. Then, just 4 days before his supposed death date, they got a break. A hiker, way up in Northern California, stumbled on this remote, rundown cabin, and inside, they found the body of the storage unit's owner, Malcolm Pierce. Malcolm Pierce had been dead for months. It was a suicide. And right there, next to his body, he'd left behind an explanation, a 47-page handwritten note that laid out the entire horrifying truth. It wasn't a killer's confession. It was the testament of a man who had been living with a burden so unimaginable that it had slowly, piece by piece, destroyed him. In this note, Malcolm explained everything. He wasn't a killer. He said that starting back in 2003, he started having these visions, crystal clear flashes where he'd see a complete stranger's exact moment of death. At first, he tried to intervene. He desperately tried to warn people. But he learned, tragically, that you can't change fate. The deaths were fixed points in time, and he was powerless to stop them. So he decided his only role was to be a witness. The photos were his proof, his terrible, terrible burden. The weight of seeing 347 people die it destroyed him. He became a recluse, totally isolated, haunted by the faces he'd photographed. And then, right before he took his own life, He had one final vision. But this time, he didn't see a stranger die. He saw Dan Morrison, years in the future, rolling up the door to Unit 217 and finding that box. So he took the photo, he added it to the pile, and he ended his note with this chilling apology, explaining that the curse wasn't dying with him, it was just being passed on. And that was the final, terrifying twist in the whole story. July 4th was never the day Dan was going to die. It was the day his old life was going to end. It was the day he would inherit Malcolm's awful gift. The photograph didn't mark his death, it marked his transformation. It was a snapshot of the exact second he would become the next person cursed to see what no one should ever have to see. So July 4th came and went. It was eerily quiet. Dan Morrison was alive. The police protection was called off, and the case was officially closed. But Detective Rodriguez noted in her final report that Dan was a profoundly changed man. He was quiet, withdrawn. His eyes had this haunted, faraway look. He started avoiding crowds, shying away from any human contact. The upbeat, optimistic guy who hunted for treasure, he was just gone, replaced by a man who had stared into the abyss, only to find it was now staring back at him. About 2 months later, Dan walked into a pawn shop, and he bought a used Polaroid camera, the same model Malcolm had used. He started taking pictures of strangers from a distance. When Detective Rodriguez checked in on him one last time, she asked him why, and his answer was quiet and just full of resignation. He said, "I'm documenting. Someone has to bear witness." He's continuing Malcolm's grim work, collecting these prophecies in a cardboard box, carrying the terrible weight of what he now sees. That $50 storage unit, it didn't hold a death sentence for Dan Morrison. It held something maybe infinitely worse, a life sentence. A life of watching and knowing and being completely powerless to do anything about it. The curse didn't die with Malcolm Pierce. It just found a new host, a new witness. Which leaves us with one last, really unsettling question. When the burden finally becomes too much for Dan to bear, whose picture will be the last one he ever takes?